The laughter in that boardroom was the kind that clings to you, not the warm kind that fills a room with something good. The sharp kind. The kind that says, "You don't belong here, and we want you to know it." Talia Owusu-Brennan stood at the door of the 36th floor conference room at Meridian Capital Group, with a folder under her arm and her chin level. 26 years old, the youngest portfolio strategist the firm had ever hired. Though nobody in that room knew it yet, nobody in that room had bothered to find out. "Excuse me," she stepped inside. The man at the head of the table looked up. Senior Vice President Howard Crest, 17 years at Meridian, the kind of man who had his name on 3 plaques in the lobby and made sure everyone knew it. He looked at Talia the way people look at a package delivered to the wrong address. "The catering entrance is on the lower level," he said. A few people at the table smiled. One woman covered her mouth. Talia didn't move. "I'm not catering," she said. "I'm Talia Owusu-Brennan. I was asked to present the Q3 restructuring analysis to the committee." Crest leaned back in his chair. He had the particular confidence of a man who had never once in 17 years been wrong about anything, or at least had never been told so. By whom? By the board. That landed differently than she expected. Not silence. Something thicker than silence, the kind of pause that happens when a room recalibrates. But Crest recovered quickly. He had practice. "The board doesn't schedule junior analysts into executive briefings," he said. "What division are you even in?" "Strategy. I transferred from the Toronto office 8 weeks ago." 8 weeks. He repeated it like a diagnosis. 8 weeks, and you're walking into my committee meeting with. He glanced at the folder. "Whatever that is. A complete restructuring model for the Northern portfolio. 47 pages. You wrote a 47-page restructuring model in 8 weeks. I wrote it in 3. I spent the other 5 weeks checking it." Someone at the table actually laughed at that. Not cruelly, just surprised. But Crest didn't find it funny. "Miss Owusu-Brennan," he didn't try to repeat it. That told her something. "This committee," he said, slowly, "has been meeting for 11 years. The people in this room have decades of combined experience in capital markets, risk assessment, and institutional investment. What exactly do you think you're going to tell us that we don't already know?" Talia set the folder on the table. She didn't open it yet. "I think," she said, "that the Northern portfolio has been leaking value for 6 consecutive quarters, and that nobody in this room has identified why. I think the model you've been using to assess sector risk is built on a 2014 assumptions framework that hasn't been updated since your last restructuring. And I think that if you give me 20 minutes, I can show you exactly where the exposure is and what to do about it." The room was very quiet. Howard Crest looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the man to his left. Dennis Farrow, Chief Risk Officer, 22 years at the firm, the kind of man who said very little and missed nothing. Farrow's expression hadn't changed. He was watching Talia with the careful attention of someone deciding whether to be interested. Crest made a sound in the back of his throat. Not quite a laugh. Something dismissive. "We'll finish our current agenda first," he said. "You can wait in the hall." She waited in the hall for 40 minutes. She knew what he was doing. She'd seen it before, in different offices, different cities, different configurations of the same room. The waiting was the point. The waiting was meant to be the answer. She sat in one of the chairs outside the frosted glass doors and opened her folder and read through her own analysis again. Not because she needed to, but because it steadied her. She had written every line of it. She knew every assumption, every data point, every place where she'd made a judgment call and why. This was hers. 40 minutes in a hallway didn't change that. At some point, a young man came out of the elevator with a tray of coffees. He looked at her sitting there with her folder and nodded. "Committee running long?" he asked. "Apparently Crest in there?" "Yes." He made a face that said everything and went back to the elevator. The glass doors opened at the 43-minute mark. A woman leaned out, mid-50s, sharp eyes, the kind of blazer that cost more than Talia's first car. "They'll see you now," she said, in a tone that suggested she thought this was a waste of everyone's time. Talia gathered her folder, smoothed her jacket, and walked back in. The room felt different now. Not warmer, the air conditioning hadn't changed. But the energy had shifted in a way she couldn't quite name. Crest was still at the head of the table, but he was looking at his phone. Several people had refilled their water glasses. The meeting had the slightly restless quality of a room that had talked itself in circles. "All right," Crest said, without looking up from his phone. "You've got 10 minutes. "I only need 8, Talia said. She opened the folder. She had learned early in her career that there are 2 kinds of presentations. The kind where you walk people through what you know, and the kind where you show them something they can't unsee. The first kind is useful. The second kind is what she'd prepared. She didn't use slides, she'd considered it and decided against it. This room didn't need visuals, it needed clarity. She placed a single printed chart on the table, face up, and slid it toward the center. "This is your Northern Portfolio Sector allocation against the benchmark, Q1 through Q3 of this year," she said. "The red line is you. The black line is what the benchmark would suggest for this risk profile. You can see the divergence starting in Q2. Nobody said anything, but 3 people leaned forward. "The divergence isn't random," she continued. "It's systematic. It tracks directly to your infrastructure sub-sector weighting, which was set in 2019 and hasn't been recalibrated since. The problem is that the macro conditions that justified that weighting no longer exist. Interest rate environment, regulatory shifts in Alberta and BC, post-pandemic supply chain normalization, all of it has changed the risk calculus, and your model hasn't caught up." She placed a second sheet on the table. "This is what a recalibrated allocation looks like. Conservative assumptions throughout. I've used figures more cautious than your own historical averages. Even with those numbers, the adjusted model produces a projected improvement of between 4.2 and 6.8 percentage points in risk-adjusted return over the next 6 quarters. Silence. Real silence, this time. Not the performative kind from earlier. Dennis Farrow picked up the second. He read it slowly. His face gave nothing away, but he read it twice. "Where did you source the regulatory shift data?" he asked. His voice was even, careful. "Public record from the Alberta Utilities Commission and the BC Environmental Assessment Office, cross-referenced against 12 comparable institutional portfolios. The citations are on page 31 of the full report." Farrow nodded, once, still reading. Crest was watching him. Talia noticed that. The way Crest's eyes went to Farrow before they came back to her, that was interesting. "This is preliminary," Crest said. His voice had changed, though. Just slightly. The edge of dismissiveness was still there, but it had lost some of its certainty. "You're presenting a model built on 8 weeks of institutional knowledge. Do you understand how much context you're missing?" "I understand I may be missing context," Talia said. "That's why I spent 5 weeks checking the model against your firm's own historical data, which your compliance archive made available to me through standard onboarding access. Every assumption in this analysis is grounded in Meridian's own documented performance, not external benchmarks alone." She paused. "If there's context I've missed, I'd welcome the correction. But the divergence in the chart is real regardless of my tenure. The data is the data." Crest opened his mouth. He closed it again. Farrow set down the second sheet and looked at Talia directly for the first time. "How long did you say it took you to build this?" he asked. 3 weeks to build, 5 to verify. "And you transferred from Toronto?" 8 weeks ago." Farrow looked at Crest. Crest looked at the chart. "Leave the full report," Farrow said. "We'll review it before the end of the week." Of course. She set the full 47-page document on the table. Page 30 for Page 38 for the sensitivity analysis. "If you have questions about the methodology, I'm available." She picked up her now empty folder, the shell of it, nothing inside, and walked to the door. She was almost through it when Crest spoke. "Miss Owusu-Brennan." She turned. He was looking at the chart still. Not at her. The 2014 framework, he said. Who told you about it? Nobody, she said. I found it in the methodology documentation. It was dated. He nodded, slowly, like a man deciding whether to be angry or impressed and not quite landing on either. She went back to her desk. The next 2 weeks were a particular kind of quiet, the kind that feels like waiting, even when you can't name what you're waiting for. Talia went about her work. She answered emails. She attended the regular Tuesday briefings, sat in the back, said nothing unless asked. She ate lunch at her desk most days. Not because she was avoiding anyone, but because she genuinely found the analysis absorbing. There was a secondary thread in the Northern portfolio data that she hadn't included in the initial presentation, a currency exposure issue in the international subholdings that she was starting to think mattered more than anyone realized. She built a second model. Nobody had asked her to. She built it anyway. Her direct manager, Patricia Hendricks, who was kind in a distracted sort of way, and clearly had no idea what to do with someone like Talia, stopped by her desk on a Thursday morning. Pharaoh's assistant called, she said, with the faint bewilderment of someone relaying information they don't fully understand. He wants to see you. 11 o'clock. Thank you, Talia said. Hendricks hovered for a moment. Do you know what it's about? I have a guess, Talia said. She went back to her second model. Dennis Farrow's office was on the 34th floor, 2 floors above the committee room. It was a corner office, which meant windows on 2 sides, which meant you could see the whole sweep of the harbor and the bridge. And, on a clear day, the mountains going blue in the distance. Talia had heard about the view. She hadn't seen it yet. Farrow was standing when she came in, which surprised her. He gestured to a chair across from his desk and sat down himself. On his desk, open, was her 47-page report. She could see from where she sat that it was annotated, heavily. Post-its in 3 colors, handwritten margin notes, dense enough that the pages had started to curl at the edges. I've been in risk assessment for 22 years, Farrow said. I've read thousands of institutional analyses, junior, senior, external consultants, the whole range. He looked at her report. This is not a junior analysis. Talia waited. The currency exposure thread you flagged in the appendix, he said. I didn't include it in the main presentation, she said. I wasn't sure I'd had time to fully develop it. I know you didn't include it. I found it anyway. He paused. Have you developed it further since? Yes, I'd like to see it. I can have it to you by end of day. He nodded. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at her in the careful way he had, the way that suggested he was deciding how much to say. The committee voted yesterday, he said. We're recommending a full review of the Northern Portfolio Allocation Framework, beginning next month. Your analysis will be used as the primary reference document. Talia didn't let anything show on her face. I'm glad it was useful, she said. It was more than useful. He picked up a pen, a plain one, ballpoint, the kind you don't notice, and tapped it once against the edge of the report. Crest pushed back. I want you to know that. He spent most of Tuesday arguing that the analysis was too narrow in scope. Was he right? No. But the fact that you asked, that tells me something. He set the pen down. He'll push back again. You should expect that. Crest has been in this building for 17 years and he protects his territory the way people protect things they've built their identity around. I understand. Do you? He said it without condescension, genuinely asking. I've met Howard Crest before, Talia said. Not him specifically, but the version of him that exists in every building. Yes, I understand. Farrow looked at her for a moment longer. The second analysis, he said. Currency exposure. End of day. End of day, she confirmed. She went back to her desk and finished what she'd already been building. The pushback came from Crest the following Monday. It came in the form of an email. Not to Talia, but to Hendricks, CC'd to 3 members of the committee, laying out a series of concerns about the methodology of the restructuring analysis, framed in language that was careful enough to be deniable, but pointed enough to be clear. The word preliminary appeared 4 times. The phrase limited institutional context appeared twice. The name Owusu-Brennan did not appear at all. The analysis was referred to throughout as the recent submission. Hendricks forwarded it to Talia with a single line. Wanted to make sure you saw this. Talia read it twice. Then she pulled up the full citation list. From page 31 of her report, cross-referenced every source Crest had implicitly questioned, and wrote a 12-paragraph response that was so thoroughly documented, it would have been difficult to argue with on any substantive grounds. She sent it to Hendricks. Then she went back to the currency exposure model. She was 3 hours into it when her phone rang, an internal number she didn't recognize. Talia Owusu-Brennan, she answered. This is Margaret Solis. A pause, as if the name should mean something. Then, I'm executive chair of the board. Talia set down her pen. She'd heard the name. Everyone at Meridian had heard the name. Margaret Solis had co-founded the firm 31 years ago with her business partner, stepped back from daily operations a decade later, remained on the board in a role that was, by all accounts, more active than the title suggested. She was 71 years old and was said to read every material document that crossed the board's desk.
Every material document.
Miss Solis, Talia said, and was pleased that her voice came out even. I've read your Northern portfolio analysis, Solis said. Both of them, the restructuring model and the currency exposure follow-up that Dennis sent me this morning. I see. I'd like to meet with you. Not a formal meeting. Lunch, if that suits you. Wednesday? Wednesday works, Talia said. Good, my assistant will send the details. A beat. You should know that in 31 years, I have personally requested a meeting with perhaps 8 analysts at this firm. I want you to understand the weight of that before Wednesday. I understand, Talia said. The line went quiet. Margaret Solis was not what Talia had expected, though she couldn't have said precisely what she'd expected. The woman who stood up from a corner table at a quiet restaurant in the financial district on Wednesday at noon was compact and direct-looking, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of posture comes from Luparly of sitting in rooms and refusing to make herself smaller. She shook Talia's hand without preamble and gestured to the chair across from her. I ordered water, she said. Order whatever you like. They ordered. The waiter left. Solis folded her hands on the table and looked at Talia in a way that was less like an assessment and more like a recognition, as if she'd already done the assessment and was now simply confirming what she knew. Tell me how you found the 2014 framework, she said. Talia told her. The onboarding documentation, the dated methodology header, the instinct to trace the assumptions back to their source before trusting them. Solis listened without interrupting. Nobody's caught that in 11 years, she said, when Talia finished. I think it's because the returns weren't obviously suffering. The divergence was slow enough to look like normal variance, and you saw through that. The data was there, I just followed it. Solis was quiet for a moment. She had the kind of quiet that felt inhabited rather than empty. I grew up in Nova Scotia, she said. My father worked the docks. When I got my first job in finance, the man who hired me told me on my first day that I should stay out of the way and learn the culture before I had any opinions. She picked up her water glass. I spent the next 6 months developing a model that restructured his entire bond allocation strategy. He used it for 11 years. Talia looked at her. Did he credit you? She asked. No, Solis said without bitterness. That's not the point I'm making. The point is that the model worked. The work was real. Everything that came from it was real. She set down her glass. You understand that? Yes, Talia said. I understand that. Good. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to produce some friction, and I want to make sure you're anchored in something that doesn't shift when the room gets loud. Talia waited. I've been planning a formal restructuring of our portfolio oversight structure for the better part of 2 years, Solis said. We've been looking quietly for someone to lead a new internal analytics division, not a committee, not a working group, a standing division with real authority over our allocation frameworks. She paused. Your analysis convinced me we'd found her. The restaurant made its small sounds around them. A glass clinked. Someone laughed at a nearby table. "I'm 26, Talia said. "I know how old you are. I've been at this firm for 8 weeks. I know that too." Solis's voice was patient in the way of someone who has already answered the objections she knew were coming. "I'm not offering you this because of your tenure. I'm offering it because of your analysis. Your tenure will grow. Your analysis tells me what you can do with time and resources and authority." Talia was quiet. She was thinking about the 43 minutes in the hallway. She was thinking about the email that never said her name. She was thinking about a man with 17 years at the firm who still couldn't see the thing that had been sitting in the methodology documentation all along. "What's the role?" she asked. "Director of Portfolio Analytics," Solis said. "New position. Reports directly to the board. Oversight of all allocation frameworks across all portfolios. Budget for a team of your choosing. And Crest?" Solis looked at her steadily. "Howard Crest will be informed of the restructuring in the same communication that goes to the full executive team," she said. "His portfolio oversight responsibilities will be redistributed accordingly." Talia nodded slowly. "I want to be clear," she said. "I want to build something real, not a title, not a committee, something that actually changes how this firm manages risk." "That's exactly what I want," Solis said. "That's why I'm talking to you and not someone else." The food arrived. They ate. They talked for another hour about the currency exposure analysis, about the gaps Talia had already identified in the secondary portfolio frameworks, about the shape of the team she'd want to build. Solis asked sharp questions and listened to the answers with complete attention. She pushed back twice on specific assumptions in the currency model, and both times Talia had the data to hold her ground, and both times Solis acknowledged it without making it into anything more than what it was. Two people trying to find the truth in the numbers. It was the best lunch Talia had had in years. The announcement went out on a Friday morning, 3 weeks later. A firm-wide communication, sent from the executive chair's office, introducing the new division of Portfolio Analytics, effective the 1st of the following month. Director, Talia Owusu-Brennan. Talia was at her desk when it went out. She'd been told it was coming. Had spent the previous 3 weeks in quiet preparation, building out the framework for the division, drafting the job descriptions for the first 3 to make, reviewing the secondary portfolio data that she'd been accumulating in the margins of her regular work. She watched the emails come in. Some of them were warm, genuine, surprised, congratulatory in the uncomplicated way of people who'd had no stake in the previous arrangement. Pharaoh sent her a single line, "Well earned." His assistant sent a fruit basket. Talia put it in the break room. She was thinking about whether to get up and do that when a shadow appeared at the edge of her desk. Howard Crest. He looked like a man who had been rehearsing something and had decided at the last moment to say something different. "Owusu-Brennan," he said. "Crest," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her desk, at the neat stacks of analysis, the second monitor with the portfolio data running, the coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. "The 2014 framework," he said. "I knew it was dated." She looked at him. "I knew," he repeated. "I flagged it internally, years ago. Nothing happened. People get comfortable." He stopped, started again. "I'm not saying that to excuse anything. I'm saying it because I think you should know it was seen." Talia considered this. "It was seen and left in place," she said. "For years." "Yes, that's the part that matters." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, the way Pharaoh had nodded. The way people nod when they've run out of argument and have enough self-awareness to know it. "I expect you'll run a good division," he said. "I intend to." He left. She sat with that for a moment. Not with satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction felt too small for it, too contained. What she felt was something more like solidity, the particular groundedness of having built something real and watched it hold. She got up. She walked to the break room and put the fruit basket on the counter, and opened the fridge and found her lunch, which she'd actually remembered to bring that day. And she ate it standing at the window that looked out at the city below. Not the harbor view, not the mountains, just the ordinary view of the street and the buildings and the people moving through it. It was enough. It was more than enough. She went back to her desk. She had 3 job descriptions to finish and a division to build and a secondary portfolio framework that she'd been pulling at for weeks now, the thread of it winding back further than anyone had looked. She opened the file. The work was real. Everything that came from it would be real. She began.